master, which is called Master of Arts in Transdisciplinarity, which characterize him certainly most. And thank you to be there for discussion. And Beatrice Tobler, who studied European ethnology, history of art and Latin philology at the University of Basel, and who then, after being working as an assistant at the Seminar für Volkskunde Europäische Ethnologie in the same university, was a curator for communication technologies and digital culture at the Museum of Communication in Bern, and then since 2012 she worked at the Ballenberg Museum, where she now heading the museum scientific department. So it's quite also interesting to have somebody coming from visual media and visual video and working now at Ballenberg, open-air museum, which seems the most perhaps rural place to work in Switzerland. So it would be very interesting to have her point of view on this question on forums and the role and the place of a museum in the contemporary society, which is at the end of the paper of Walter Leimgruber, which I think is very, very influential and very interesting paper to think about our topic today and the question of the critical or open to discussion role of museum. So I think I will now let the word to Basil, to Rogger and Beatrice Tobler about a project that they share and which is a very interesting project after the paper of Walter.
Okay, so shall I quickly present? Okay, hello everybody and welcome, and please excuse, I originally planned to be here for both days, and now I just hop in for the discussion, but the reason is obvious, and I'm happy that at least this can take place, but I'm also happy if you excuse them. I might not stay until the end today, because at some point I'm just tired or something. I think it wasn't planned, but it was a lucky coincidence that the two of us sit on this podium today, because we are united by a project which might serve as a basis, or which might serve as an example for discussing some of the topics that are being elaborated by Walter Leimgruber's presentation. And the example is that a friend of mine and me, we started working on a topic which is called foster placement of children in Switzerland, in a historical and also actual context. And we developed an exhibition which was traveling around all Switzerland since 2009. It closed last year in the French part of Switzerland after 14 different locations, and it has been visited by a little bit more than 160,000 people, which is quite a big success for such an unsexy topic. And what unites us is that this exhibition has been in Ballenberg for something like 3 years, 3 seasons, which is a long time, and it developed a certain status there, and this is, I think, the point of departure where we can start and discuss now whether we see how it relates to what you're trying to elaborate. The first thing that I would like to connect to your paper is this nostalgia aspect that you were talking about. We relate in a certain manner to certain pasts, and at the same time we normally don't realize that the things we know about these pasts, that they are shaped, they are prepared by someone, and there are always in these narrations, or narratives if you want them, there are always things that are not being shown, stories that are not being told. And one of these stories in Switzerland is the story of these foster placed children. And that you can have a certain idea about the quantity of these people, which of course is not measurable, but we estimate that between 1920 and 1970, which is not so long ago, several 100,000 children have been taken away from their parents and have been placed in foster families or institutions all over Switzerland. The process began in the 1820s or 1830s and continued until the 1970s. Huge problem, untold stories. I would go as far as to say that one of the reasons why we managed after World War II to get out of a poor agricultural nation with emigration as the main movement of people in Switzerland to a rich, developing, economically strong nation with immigration as the main movement of people has been handled on the backs of those children. This was our hypothesis, and we started collecting data, we started talking to people, we created a platform which was called Verdienkinder Reden, Enfants Volés. And this platform consisted of two things. One thing was an exhibition. The exhibition showed the way from the past to the present in a strongly perspective way. There were only foster children that came to an age today talking about their childhood. And the second part of the platform was an event program. And the event program was always devoted to the question, how do we find a way out of these mechanisms into a future? And so, wherever we placed our platform, for example in Ballenberg, our intention was to work out with local people who were experienced, to work out something that they could talk about their history and that they could talk about what is necessary in their perspectives for them. On one hand backwards, so what do they deserve? Do they need money? Do they need access to their data in the archives? Do they need medical support, whatsoever? But also forwards, what do they expect from actors in institutions or on the political side that they do for children? So what we have here as a phenomenon is looking backwards, some sort of broadening of what could be an intangible cultural heritage, a heavy one. Uncanny was a nice word that I heard this morning in this context, a very ambiguous thing. And on the other hand, something as a real program for the future. What do we have to do that this is not going to repeat? And now I would like to hand over to you, because you we were able to place this platform in your institution, which is looking from the outside a bit conservative, and which is also celebrating this nostalgia of the rural Switzerland, presenting marvelous farmhouses and its techniques of handicraft and stuff like this. And suddenly in there was this sort of painful thing that evoked very bad emotions.
not only bad emotions. Well, thank you. Yes, as you said, an open-air museum that only shows rural culture and that only shows the agricultural economy before motorization is very restricted, and there is a big danger of depicting and being that good old past that you are talking of. And of course, we are an ideal backdrop for all of that. You can go there if you want to see that. You get all you want. So it's a perfect backdrop for all these idealisms and right-wing statements and conservative opinions. And that's a problem we have to deal with a lot of people who have prejudice, is that the right word, against our museum. And the challenge that we have is we want to be a museum that is a place for debating and negotiating the questions you have raised in your paper, of course. And we're not the only open-air museum who do that. We are part of the European Open Air Museum Association, and these topics are discussed there, and it's like a common, that's something we share, we open air museums share. We want to be a place for negotiating and debating the questions of today's society. And how can we do that, and how can we relate to the people, to the globalized world? And yeah, first of all, I have to say, you say that the lists that we have, the ICH lists, they are a result of organizations and globalization. And of course, the Open Air Museum Ballenberg is also a result of the same process. And also all the other open-air museums who founded in the 1960s and the 1970s in Europe, they are a product of these changing settlements, and the rural space was completely changed. And the rural economies still didn't exist anymore in the 1960s, but then the houses had to go because new infrastructure was needed, so it was really, the rural space was evolving rapidly, and that's why these items were collected, as you say, in the moment that they are getting lost. The things are collected. And so here we are with 109 buildings, and we want to be a museum who connects to the people and to today's Switzerland, which is urbanized, which is globalized. How can we do that? And we realized that we have to go out, and we have to go back to Switzerland and to the places where these houses once stood. And we did that. We sent a film team to 14 original places where Ballenberg houses stood. And they took footages of how it looks like in these places today. And these pictures, these videos, they depict what you described, our urbanized society. And that's very interesting. We took these images back to the museum, and we made an annual theme out of that. We put the video screens into the farmhouses, which was a kind of a provocation. And it was also, we are also restricted in doing things like that, because even our marketing team we had these days, they're all gone now. That's why I can talk about it. They were completely against this, and they didn't see the potential of such a topic to take like today's Switzerland into the museum. And with the foster children exhibition, it was a similar thing. It's not an exhibition about what used to be and what was yesterday. It's an exhibition about memories. It's about an exhibition. It's an exhibition about people who live who still were alive at the moment the exhibition was created, and who told their story. So it's about present people who have a past, a difficult past. And the great thing about this project was that the exhibition, it was already had a few stations behind it when it came to Ballenberg, and it was already like an institution. So we hosted an institution or a space that has that already had this character as a debating place for this certain topic. And luckily, it was also this topic was also very vibrant in the political discourse in Switzerland. There was a round table about this topic during the time the exhibition was in the museum, and people were coming there to discuss this topic in the exhibition. And yeah, as you said, there were, how did you say it, a few people also from our team who adopted like the exhibition and became part of this community, which dealt with how can we deal with our past and what can we do so that history is not going to repeat. And yeah, that was very, yeah, maybe you should stop me.
No, I think it was important to have also the way you're thinking this role of the museum, and we needed a bit of time just to present that. But Leimgruber, was it what you thought when you were speaking for the future of that kind of museum as a forum or something like that? Here we've got a situation which is quite strange, because this is an idealized rural Switzerland, and we put it some kind of poison, or the bad side of this rural area. So with this foster children and all that kind of poison is not perhaps a good term, I believe, if you but that kind of, I think it's, yeah, something of this bad side. And perhaps this tension is a critical part, and also create the possibility of the debate. I don't know.
On the one hand, I really think this goes in the right direction. But on the other hand, it's not enough, because this is this kind of co-creating and opening and everything, and I think that's really fine. That's what we should do. What I said, I always said that in the past that we have to open the institutions for things like this. And of course, I was provocative saying that the role of the museum is nothing else than to help to deal with this critical things like urbanization, globalization, and so on. I know that many museums in the meantime see their task in a quite different way, but I also see that this whole heritage discussion leads us a little bit in the other direction. If you look what's on the world list, it's 90% are showcases, nothing else, and they don't deal with the big questions, not only of the history of our societies, but also of the present of our societies. And so that's, sometimes for me, it feels like a backdrop. A backdrop compared to what the museums have done, at least since the 60s, 70s, where they have begun to open the houses for other groups, for other topics, for seeing all the different sides of societies. Societies just don't exist only of a nice side and an ugly side. It's much more complex. I think we shouldn't discuss in pictures like this, but in reality, what happens at the moment, I think, in the heritage discussion, is that we prefer to show the nice side and forget everything else. What many museums do today is playing a kind of, how should I call it, nice and tolerant game of you are invited to discuss with us, you are invited to participate, but this game doesn't work anymore because in the meantime everybody feels as being in a minority position, as being in a discriminated situation, even those which we saw as the majority, as the white male in his 50s, as me for example, they feel oppressed, they fear the future. So this kind of tolerance, this kind of openness, and this kind of dealing with all the feelings and emotions, as you mentioned, of this group is not enough. So the next step for me would be, well, we don't have only our task is not only to give a platform to all these groups, but to give a platform to a discussion of all these different groups together. Where is the way we want to go? And I know this is a difficult task, and that's not a task the museums or the heritage institutions can do on their own, but they can play a role. And I think what we miss today in our society are places, are spaces, are forums where discussions can be held. Because we have the social media, but social media is nothing else than a discussion of the believers to the believers. You can include yourself in a group of where everybody thinks exactly the same way you do. You never have to open your mind. You have the traditional political parties. What they are doing is nothing else than trying to stop all these developments of the future because they have no idea how to deal with it. So from left to right, all what they say is, oh look, we had it so good yesterday, but nobody has an idea how it could be tomorrow. So where are the public places where we can deal with the society of tomorrow? And this is not a tolerance towards one group or another group. This is also confrontation. I mean, the museums, it's not a task of museums of open their floors for everybody, but they have also to take a position and to show why this position could be important. And what is happening now, we have a lot of exhibitions about, football groups, minority groups, things like that. That's nice, but we need the next step. And this step is confrontation in the way of discussion, of confronting the thinking of these different groups with models and, I don't know, you even could call it ideologies, visions of the future, to develop something new.
Thanks. Do you want to react?
I'd like to add something. And again, on the backwards perspective, I think it's about correcting images. It's about shifting images towards a bigger complexity or a more adequate way of looking at it. I mean, rural Switzerland is beautiful, it's nice, it's enormously interesting traditions, has a lot of work tools, blah blah blah, you know, all this stuff. And it is much more complex because also there were power relationships, there were the rich farmers and the poor farmers and the poorest farmers, etc., etc. And we all tend not to look at this side, and I think it's important to have this complete picture and to work on it, not to idealize things. This is looking backwards. Looking forwards, I think I like this idea of this notion of future that you did. And I think there is something very important there. I think almost any notions of future are being occupied by economic players in society at the moment. And this is a relatively recent development. In the 70s or in the 60s, it was a more scientifically driven discussion that took place there. And now it's totally an economically driven discussion that is taking place. And I would like to see that it becomes a cultural discussion. I would really appreciate if this would happen. And I also think that we have to reclaim the future as a society and to take it out of the hands of these economic players who sort of occupy it and always talk about visions and missions and all this blah blah, which we all know what it looks like. It's like a slots machine and then there are 3 terms dropping out, like, I don't know, efficiency and I don't know, it doesn't matter. But I really think this is totally important. Future is something that we do, we produce every day, and also the museum as an institution, as paradoxical as this may seem, is constructing the future every day, I think. And if we get to this point, I think then really interesting things start to happen.
Thanks. Yeah, it was also the point that even our mind are colonized by words of economics, as Eminence told about yesterday, and our vocabulary is still strong. Beatrice, Tobler, you want perhaps the last reaction, and then we can open to the public.
Okay. I wanted to add something else. We as an open air museum, we also have a chance to, because we are a Swiss open air museum, and that we show all the different housing styles and all the different cultures of Switzerland. So we are not only a backdrop for the night things, as I described it, but we are also we show multiculturality, multiculturalism. We have a big potential to show the people. Switzerland is multicultural, and you can see it with all the different housing styles, all the different cultures we have, and that gives us a platform through what we are. And but how can we work with migrant people? We do that as soon as we work with school classes, for example, and. For example, when school classes visit Ballenberg, they make an experience, the migrant pupils, they make the experience that, rich Switzerland has a similar rural past as my country, for example. And the things you see here, which probably in their own country are not of value for them, they see that here in Switzerland, these things are shown in the museum, which means that they are valuable. That gives themselves a certain value in seeing, I don't come from an underdeveloped country or whatever you want to name it, to Switzerland where everybody is rich, but we share something, we have something in common, and maybe that can give a perspective. I don't know, maybe it's naive. But somebody at an AEOM conference, the Association of European Open Air Museums, once said maybe we shouldn't focus so much on the differences within cultures, but maybe we should also focus on what we have in common, which is like an anthropological perspective, and maybe a future which is worth to live in all together. Maybe it's naive, I don't know. Could go in this direction, that we think about what do we have in common and what defines us as mankind living together. But yeah, maybe it's not the solution. It's just I'm just quoting somebody.
Yeah, perhaps it's it's always difficult to get out of this on the far right. So this kind of multiplicity ideal that we've got, but perhaps it's more complex. And so, do anybody want to react?
Hi, I just wanted to say something that I learned from the person I did my PhD with, who is Laura Nader. She's coined the famous phrase, studying up. And when you invite people into museums, mainly the people you're inviting in are so-called down. We're not inviting the CEO of Facebook into our museums. It's very difficult. I don't think he accepts very many invitations. But I think that's an important thing to be, where museums could be perhaps more creative. Start looking at interacting with places of power and influence. And maybe you can do it with museums by, I mean, imagine a great open-air museum built around Facebook headquarters. Just set it up and do it. They do a very good job of protecting themselves, the power elite, as C. Wright Mills called them. But when you look at what's happening in America, and I think it's a very different situation from the European situation, what you're getting is corporates, purely corporate-sponsored museums that are dictating from A to Z what the dialogue, what the discourse is going to be. And Europe has the advantage of not being in that situation, but I don't think we're using it necessarily to full advantage. We need to be bringing the people who set the economic discourse need to be confronted with museums much more. And even politicians don't set foot in museums except in a very local, controlled way. But think about economic actors as you think about who you want to include, how you want to so-called make participation with communities. That would be a very difficult but maybe useful idea.
Yeah, I think this is quite good. If we think in Switzerland of the role of the farmer, it would be very difficult to speak about that. We can speak from user side, but it would be very difficult to speak about that. We made a collection in the shuttle from the little gifts, stupid gifts that the medics, the doctors receive from the farmers. So it's advertising gifts. It's completely stupid, but it's funny then, because you have something of that power of the lobby giving gifts to medics and doctors.
If you mention pharmaceutical industry, yesterday I could read in the newspaper that 2,000 people lose their job at Novartis. Because they made, well, on the one hand, they won, I don't know, some millions last year. They want to rate 35% out of their budget must be their gain, and if it's under 35, then it's bad, and they have to restructure it. And so 2,000 people, that's quite a lot in Switzerland, will lose their job, and at the meantime they build up other complexes. Where is the local museum in Basel or somewhere in this region who shows exactly this situation, what means globalization, with the example of Novartis, with 2,000 people losing their jobs, other people gaining millions or billions. Some families gain every year 1-2 billion out of the shares of Novartis without doing anything, and then showing up how this system works and what it means for the 2,000 people and what it means for all the rich people gaining money, and for the people, for example, in Asia or in the United States, where new centers and new jobs are created. And I think this would be a nice topic, for example, for dealing with the heritage of the modern industry.
Yes, I have, I think, two side remarks maybe, and I want to come back with them to the ICH topic. This UNESCO lists and inventories of ICH were mentioned several times today and yesterday. And I think we have to take care that and have to keep in mind that those lists and inventories are not a unity. That means that an inventory in Switzerland can look very, very different from one in the Netherlands or from one somewhere else in the world. So we have to be aware of this. This is one important thing I would like to say. And the other is, in that context, we also have to reflect on our terminology, I think, when we use words like urban and rural. And I do not want to blame us or you to put it as a distinction, rural and urban. But we really have to be careful with these terminologies. Because they are no distinctions. They are not opposites of each other, right? But we can be misunderstood if we talk about urban and rural in one sentence. And I would like to underline what you, Basil, said, that also rural life is so heterogeneous. And that we really have to, this is very important to underline again and again.
I would simply, can I add one little sentence? I think it's very, I don't need the microphone, just one sentence. The topic of foster placement is one that is not concentrated on rural Switzerland, not at all, of course, because there have been many workers' neighborhoods in this rapidly growing cities where children have been taken away from their parents as well. And there are some differences in how they were treated or where they were placed, etc. But I think it's very important, especially with this example, where I think there you can perfectly illustrate what you were saying. This difference as a dichotomy is absolutely dysfunctional.
Yeah.
Perhaps one reaction and one question.
Just two short remarks. Yes, of course, I'm aware that the lists are very different. My reference went to the world list, not of the national list. I see many different national lists. I was also fascinated and involved in the discussion here in Switzerland. And I can see many positive things coming out of the list. At the end, what I see on the world level is, well, quite frustrating. That's what I wanted to say. And urban-rural, yeah, of course, you're right. I mean, I was asked to say something about urbanized society, and of course, I know it's not urban here and rural there. Switzerland is a special place where you can see this, because most of the people live in a strange in-between, what we call agglomeration here. And of course, rural life is influenced by globalization and all these processes as much as urban regions. Nevertheless, if you look at the political developments, for example in the United States or in other European countries, then you see a comeback of this difference of urban lifestyle and rural lifestyle, where we have thought that's gone, and it comes back, and it probably comes back because this urbanized structure nevertheless gives a lot of people, and I don't think only people living in the rural, but only people, also people living in the urban side, the feeling that they are lost, that they are forgotten, that they have no perspective for the future, and so it's not one thing or another thing. It's much more complex, but nevertheless, developments are very interesting.
I think perhaps I think there's a lot of questions, but we had to go to the coffee break. No, we can have the discussion. That's it. Yeah. We are still a bit late. Thanks a lot. And